So again, back to our flow model, we're already decreasing flow by preventing action potential from being generated on the muscle membrane and dihydropyridine receptors from being activated. Now, we have also increased outflow via the circuit pumps so that the remaining calcium in the cytosol is pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which will decrease the regulated mass, in this case, the cytosolic calcium. And remember, as long as calcium is present in the cytosol, contraction will continue to happen. So by removing calcium from the cytosol, it can no longer bind to troponin C. So it impairs the binding of calcium to the troponin C. Therefore, troponin will pull the tropomyosin back over the actin-active sites, and myosin heads can no longer bind to actin. So there are no cross bridges being formed, and therefore contraction stops. So now we have stopped acetylcholine from binding and exciting the muscle, and we have removed the calcium from the cytosol to prevent contraction, and together this leads to relaxation of the muscle. So for the rest of this lecture, we're gonna look at the different muscle fiber types and different types of muscle. So talking specifically about skeletal muscle fibers, we can divide the muscle fibers into two main categories, differentiated based on the type of myosin head that they express. So these two categories leads to different properties in terms of what they look like, how much force they generate, and how fatigable they are. So starting with our slow twitch fiber, this type of fiber is also known as type 1 or oxidative fiber. It's smaller, don't generate a lot of force or force quickly, but are not easily fatigued. And this fiber can sustain low force contractions for an extended period of time. So it's called oxidative because rely on oxidative metabolism. And we're gonna understand this further in the next few lectures. Then our second type of fiber, it's called the fast twitch. It's also known as type 2 or glycolytic fiber. This fiber, it's larger, it can generate a lot of force and produce force quickly, but these fibers are easily fatigued. The fast twitch fibers, they allow for short bursts of high force development, so can be further divided into type 2A, which is a hybrid between slow and fast twitch. And this type 2A fiber resists fatigue to some extent. And the other category for the type 2, it's called the type 2X, which is purely fast twitch. This fiber can generate a lot of force, but fatigue very quickly. So here are some pictures to give you an idea of what these fibers look like. So here in the left, we have a longitudinal section of a muscle showing both fibers, fiber types. We have our fiber type 1, which is a slow twitch, also known as red fiber. And we have our white fiber, which is the type 2, also known as fast twitch fiber. And in the right hand side, we have a cross section of the muscle. So a few things to take note of. There are some differences in size. The diameter of fast twitch fibers is larger, and it contributes to different properties when it comes to generating force. There is also differences in color. The slow twitch fibers are more red compared to the fast twitch fibers. And the reason for why these slow twitch fibers are more red, it's because of the amount of myoglobin presented in these fibers. So you probably heard about hemoglobin. So this molecule is the oxygen carrier in the blood. So it looks red when bound to oxygen. And myoglobin, it's similar. It gives slow twitch fibers their red appearance. So they're more oxidative, which means that they have greater oxygen carrying capacity. In terms of the recruitment order, there is a principle that explains this, which is called the Heinemann size principle. This principle describes the order in which muscle fibers are recruited as we contract our muscle. The order depends on how much force or effort is required. So starting by recruiting smaller motor units composed of type 1 slow twitch fibers at lower intensities and easy movement. So as the intensity of contraction or force requirement increases, we start to recruit bigger motor units composed of type 2 fast twitch fibers. And the reason for the order of this order is due to the motor neuron excitability. So it's easier to recruit a small motor neuron compared to a larger motor neuron. The smaller the motor neurons are, it requires a lower stimulus to elicit an action potential. Therefore, it's easily excited. So a small motor neuron will have a small depolarization and therefore will have a big effect on membrane potential. So remember, easier recruitment of type 1 fibers. So differently, a big motor neuron has the same absolute of depolarization and then will have much smaller effect. Therefore, will cause a larger depolarization needed to activate this motor neuron, and that type 2 fibers, it innervates. Therefore, the amount of depolarization required to bring a small motor neuron to action potential threshold is much smaller than for a large motor neuron. So remember, the smaller motor neurons innervate fewer and smaller slow twitch fibers compared to large motor neurons innervating more in larger type 2 fibers. So lower levels of force generation, which means easier effort, we have smaller motor units containing type 1 slow twitch fibers recruited first. Then as force requirements goes up, it increases recruitment of larger motor units containing larger type 2 fast twitch fibers. So we have another way to think about these differences in motor neuron excitability and motor unit recruitment is by adding any drop of food coloring, adding just one drop of food coloring to a glass of water. So that would represent a small motor neuron innervating slow twitch fibers versus adding one drop of food coloring into a large bucket of water. That would represent a large motor neuron innervating fast twitch fibers. So in the single glass, will be much more affected, the single glass will be much more affected by the drop than the bucket. Coloring will disappear throughout the bucket, and that represents a smaller stimulus required to elicit an action potential in these motor neurons. So this is why it's easier to recruit smaller motor units. For example, slow twitch muscle fibers at lower levels of force. However, in the bucket, we'll need more food coloring to disperse, right? So it takes greater effort and larger action potentials to excite larger motor neurons that innervate the type 2 muscle fibers. When we put a little bit of effort into a contraction, it generates a few small action potentials in the brain and activates small motor neurons being excited, and the oxidative muscle fibers, they innervate, but not the large motor neuron. So this is why we excite slow twitch muscle fibers during easy movements, and it takes greater effort and greater action potentials on those larger motor neurons to recruit type 2 fast twitch muscle fibers. So here in this table, we have a summary just for you guys to remember and understand this better. So the smaller motor neurons that activate slow twitch fibers are small. Therefore, we have a low recruitment threshold. On the other hand, larger motor neurons that activate fast twitch fibers are large. Therefore, we have a high recruitment threshold. So that same small absolute depolarization will have a much smaller effect on a larger motor neuron that feeds large type 2 muscle fibers. So as mentioned before, the reason that our fiber types have different contractile properties, it's because of differences in myosin heads. So remember that myosin head is an ATPase, right? It breaks down ATP in order to perform cross-bridge cycling. So the faster the myosin ATPase can break down ATP, the more power strokes can happen in a given period of time. So myosin heads in type 1 slow twitch fibers break down ATP very slowly, and that limits the number of power strokes this myosin head can perform for a given amount of time. Myosin head in type 2 fast twitch fibers breaks down ATP much more quickly, therefore can perform a greater number of power strokes for a given unit of time. So if you look at force development properties by different muscle fibers in this graph, and we have slow twitch in blue. So we can see in this picture that we have slowest ability to break down ATP due to slow myosin ATPase. Therefore, generate little force and generate it relatively slowly. We have our fast twitch fiber in green. So this fiber have a faster ability to break down ATP due to fast myosin ATPase, therefore generate a lot of force and generate it very quickly. And we have our type 2X, which is even fastest. So again, this is all about the ability of that myosin head to break down